Well, thanks for having me. This is Drag and Drop into the Dungeon, a React-DnD adventure, title generated by ChatGPT. I asked for React-DnD and Dungeons and Dragons puns. This is a good one. All right. So I'm Tom Kaczanko, 17th level programmer. My pronouns are he, him. I'm currently a senior engineer at Lexia on the Core 5 reading app, which is React.js web on React Native iOS reading app. We use a lot of drag and drop. We use a lot of React-DnD, older version. Also on the Unify Common UI team, which basically we're building tools and components and things to work. Oh, yeah. Minimize Teams thing. No, you're fine. I know, that's like behind the scenes. I can't even see it, which is fun. Anywho, so on the Common UI team, we're building a new drag and drop engine with the new React-DnD 16 hooks and all that good stuff. So that's basically just a little backstory there. For Core 5, we have different task components, which are basically games for kids to play, and like 8 of them out of 20 some are use drag and drop. So what is Dungeons and Dragons? It's commonly abbreviated as D&D or D&D. It's kind of the joke. It's a fantasy tabletop role-playing game originally designed by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. What does this have to do with anything? Nothing. It's just a light theme here. And I've talked about React-DnD and Unified D&D and stuff in scrums for a year and a half now. And a lot of jokes come up when it's, oh, I'm working on D&D, you know. So what is drag and drop? It's a graphical, computer graphical user interface is basically just pointing device gesture, just moving some object to somewhere else. On Windows, or Mac, you're putting some file inside a folder. You're moving things around. You're organizing your icons. We're all very used to it. It's not found in all software, though. It's pretty familiar and common, and basically that helps people know how to use it. So what's React-DnD? It's a drag and drop package for React.js. It's on version 16.0.1. It's 1.7 million weekly downloads. It's been around for a while. The support is great. The docs are kind of simple if you're just looking for like what this hook does. But there is a tutorial you can find that teaches you how to build like a chessboard app that's amazing. Like once you go through that and the steps and what it takes to build that, that really helps you understand. I actually took that example and ported it to start on my work. So I started on doing it in React Native and React XP. And that was just like a great way to get into it. Just look through the code, look through how they tell you on their website, kind of how to build that. It's pretty cool. So why use drag and drop as UX or for your UI? Again, familiarity. We've seen it many times before. We're used to it. The action of putting something inside of something else could make sense for your UI. For the kids, we have things, you know, objects of a certain color. You need to sort it in the red bucket or the blue bucket, or the prefix of the word is important, or the suffix. So there's this prefix box and a suffix box and things like that. It's fun for kids. Yep. Okay. Oh, cool. That's nice. Yeah. So why React-DnD then? There are a couple other different flavors of it, or you can just do HTML has their own drag and drop functionality you can use. Freedom, I like it. It lets you respond to things happening, which is a very React way of doing things. It has varying levels of complexity, but you could use some things or you don't. You can just use a drag to move something and respond to how that happened. This went over this, okay. You can do, you know, figure out where something was dropped. There are things you can get hover, you can get information about if it's dragging, where it's dragging, and do a lot of stuff. It's well supported. It has many supporting packages kind of adding on to it, and it's very customizable. It uses React hooks in the newer versions. They actually got rid of all the HOC stuffs, but their older versions have decorators and HOCs, which were fine. Hooks let you use basically different React features with simple function in your function components or regular components. And React-DnD comes with basically its own set of hooks. That's basically all that's on the docs. It just shows you how to do a couple hooks. But once you really dive into things, you can learn a lot more. Okay, so let's head into the dungeon. See some examples and some code here. Let's go here. So welcome. Oh, there we go. Welcome to the dungeon. Choose a level. All right, we're going to start out. I think everything's reset. This is just a spa, and it just changes out a React component, so very advanced. All right, so level 1, we have a dragon that's flying around. He's not dragging. Now, if I move him around, hey, he's dragging, and I have this great, beautiful preview. Look at that. So basically, just look at the code for this. It's pretty simple. That readable? That's pretty big, right? Yeah. Okay. Basically, we start at the top. We have our function component for level 1. We use the use drag hook. The first thing use drag will spit back in this array I'm destructuring is collected properties. Basically, you'll see this in a little bit, and then a drag ref. Basically, put it on your div, and that will let React-DnD know what you're dragging around. I'm going to use that in quotes, dragging. So use drag needs a function, basically returns a spec object. Basically, you just ask for different things. You put different things in it, and then when you drag and do different things, you can get these items back. Or some of them mean something to other parts, like drop. Type has to match up with kind of what you're dropping and things like that. So type dragon, that really doesn't mean anything right here. But the collect function, so we specify collect. It gets a monitor, which is basically a drag source monitor. And this is where you can get all sorts of information from. Right now, I only care about is dragging, but you can get a bunch of different things. So this is dragging, is returning from the collect, so it's going to be on this collected. I'm using it right here, is dragging to show the text is dragging or not. I'm also using it just as a class on the dragon, so when I'm dragging it, the one that's there is hidden. Because in React-DnD and a lot of drag and drop engines, you're not actually moving the component. You're always dragging like a preview or something else like that. You can, but that would probably get a lot of headache putting things back and stuff like that. Okay, so that was pretty simple, but that just gets us the dragon that we can drag around. So if we go to 2, this dragon is standing right now, and then when we pick it up, we have a different preview that looks a lot nicer and changes images, completely different thing. So the other standing dragon's hidden. Now we're showing this one. You get the idea. Funny thing about this, I'm going to show you a little bug. I couldn't figure out, but I don't care because I don't like kind of the code I'm using for this. It's the second time it doesn't seem to work. Probably some sort of React rendering thing, and it takes forever to put back. It's cool. All right, it's back. So let's go look at the code for this, and I'll show you why. Same thing here with the use drag, except the third parameter, you can get a drag preview to stick on a ref or a different component or a different, it's for a ref, but for a different div or component or something you want to move around. I'm destructuring just to collect it here, but I'm just doing the same thing. Collecting is dragging to show. This is using a drag preview image, which is the thing I don't like because you don't get too much control over it. But it takes a connect property for your drag preview and a source for what you want to show. Yeah, I think some sort of rendering here. I had keys on it. I had other things, but then at the end of the day, I didn't really care too much because I do things differently. And once you get more complex, you can change things up and just do it a little better. But this is pretty simple to kind of change what the HTML drag preview is, because the ugly one with the background is like the HTML drag preview, which you'll eventually fight and we will find a way to defeat, which is great. All right, let's go to the third example. It's level 3. Okay. let's see, this is a little smaller. Only dragons are allowed in the dungeon. So this is a goblin here from a book I enjoy reading to my son called Dragons Are the Worst. It's about a goblin who thinks dragons are just the worst, and he thinks he's super scary. So if I drag him, not really going in the dungeon there. Basically, that little slide back animation is like an invalid drop. So if you'll see, we take the dragon. Oh yeah, the fire goes, and he disappears into the dragon, into the dungeon. Yeah. See some code for that. Basically, the first couple examples are pretty simple, and then we'll get into a little more exciting things. But I have just a couple states here to where we figure out can drop, if it's dropped, just to turn off the fire, and who's dropped. There's a div at the bottom that's showing up in all white text, so that's great because this is a little smaller. But that's not a big deal. So up here we have two drags. Basically, I don't care about collecting any information from the monitor if we're dragging or what's dragging or the item on it. So I have one type goblin. He has an item name goblin, which is used up there, and then another one dragon. So for the use drop hook, basically you can get collected information again, but I'm skipping that. But I'm just getting the drop ref out, setting that down here on the dungeon gate, which has a class, does a couple things. That's basically to show the fire, and then the fire goes away when you drop. So the drop takes another object, or it's going to take another object to what it accepts. So the accept type has to match the drag type up here, basically. And that's one way to prevent the drop from happening for the wrong kind of type of item. Not a super common use case for UI. It's if you're dragging different types of items and you need to like organize things, but it could be something you need to worry about. And then basically we set up a drop handler here. Set drop to true so that the fire goes away, and then set who dropped. So basically on the bottom, we couldn't see it, but it says who dropped. The dragon is in the dungeon. The drop function and a lot of other functions we'll see can take different parameters in, or you can get the item. So the item here with the name dragon, so you can pull that out and set that information to where, so take it from the drag, you put a huge data object, and then on the drop, you can get that data object back. So if you have different components, you can pass data around and know kind of what was dropped where and what you're going to be doing with things. Okay, so so you can take that. You can also get the monitor out that we saw before, the drag source monitor, drop target monitor, to figure out like what, get the item that's hovering over if you don't want to pass it in different ways. There's a couple other ways to just pass data around. So I'm using it on the hover here, the hover handler, and that's basically to show the fire. So you get the item, do the check can drop, which up here basically just says if the item name is dragon, set can drop. So that'll be true, and then this is just a class name for the show up the fire. So when we did the goblin, there was nothing, no fire. Let's see, go back to 3. So no fire, no anything, and then we have an invalid drop. It's just going to sadly go back to where it started. But again, we're hovering, we show the fire. It stays hovered for a while, and there's ways you can get more crazy into the code to make it hover and hover off and hover back on and things like that. But yeah, it accepts that and it's there. So one thing about a lot of drag and drop engines, at least ones in React and things, since we have rendering and conditional rendering, is that for drag and drop engines, you don't actually move an object. You're not actually moving a div, and now it's the child of this component on its own. You have to do all that work. That's kind of what I said when I meant meant the freedom, and that's what I like. It's a little more work for you to do, but I think it gives you a lot of capability for what your program can do. So let's see the next example. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not doing anything to hide it when you pick up. So I'm not using any collecting anything about is dragging or anything like that. Yeah. 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 You can do something completely different, like make him disappear, make whatever. Yeah. I mean it's just an element in the div. You can get when you drop, even if it's an invalid drop, or it might need to be still a valid drop, but there could be other ways to do it. You got tons of use drops. Yeah. Yeah, you can have one that'll line up to the goblin, one to line up to the dragon, all sorts of things. Oh yeah. Okay, so next example. So level 4 introduces something called a drag layer. And a drag layer is just where is your preview going to be and where is your drag preview and information about your drag preview. So it's another hook, use drag layer, and it's going to give you information about where your preview can be and what it's hovering over and what item is dragging and other information like that. So with that, we can fix the bug we had earlier by just doing something completely differently and just having a preview. There we go. Depending on where you pick it up, there's still a little buggy. But now I have a dragon flying around and I know where it is, or where the cursor is basically. So the cursor is almost in 0, 0 there. Move it around and it stays in here, the object. So when I did things before, I can drag this like onto my desktop and stuff because it's using a different thing. And this is kind of all in the JavaScript and in the React application. So let's see some code for that. So basically just keeping track of the offset in a state, using the drag I did before with the drag preview. And basically what I'm doing with the drag preview ref is doing some code, which actually took a little bit to find because I haven't worked in the HTML side of things, the web side of things in a while. In React Native, you don't have any of this. You have to do it yourself. So it's basically this is saying I don't want to see any sort of drag preview. I just want to get the information from the drag layer. But yes, please still capture the dragging state. So anytime that preview updates, set the drag preview, whatever drag preview React-DnD was going to use, or whatever HTML was going to use, just give it an empty image. It's an empty 1 pixel image. So we'll see later that we can get around that. Basically, this is very nice just to not fight HTML. So I created this dungeon drag layer component. Let's go into that. Basically, it's drag layer. So we use the drag layer, takes in the monitor, and it's going to return collected object. Doesn't return any other refs or anything to use. This drag layer class is basically positioned absolutely, and it's the full screen. It's 0, 0. It could actually just be top left pixel, but that's going to be kind of where the offset starts. So you can position it somewhere else to drag inside of a smaller box, but for most of our stuff and most of the stuff I've worked on, you want it to be full screen, which when you get to React Native, React XP land, you can't have a child component be bigger than the parent. So your drag layer has to be high up in the kind of the DOM tree. That's at the tip. But this one, since in Webland, you can basically expand it to the whole thing. So all it's doing, taking in a children property and set offset function. When we get the offset, get the client offset off the monitor, which is basically the last recorded XY position for the pointer. Basically, we just set it on this hook function I passed in. And that's pretty simple, and actually I'll reuse that later. So I passed in the set offset that we did here. Still have the dragon. I actually cared that we're dragging, so I'm collecting that information again. And then basically here, if we have an offset, I'm just putting it to the screen, what it is, the X and Y. Here's my dragon down here. Same thing, we're hiding it when he goes away, when we're dragging. And my dragon preview is just going to be a div. I don't need any sort of ref or anything. This is basically set up to be an empty image. So this is going to kind of be like the pseudo preview, but it's actually going to be the real preview you see. And so I'm taking that offset and just setting the style, transforming, translate XY, minus 300 just because it's a 600 by 600 image, so the cursor's in the center. That's basically it. So that's what you get, a nice drag preview that is contained in here, and it works every time, almost every time. And yeah, that was a weird, whoops. That was a weird bug if you pick it up in the wrong area. What's up? Mm-hmm. That's, yeah, it's React-DnD basically telling the HTML engine to do that, or how it takes over basically. It's putting the like draggable tags and doing it's setting up the preview. I haven't looked into the HTML one in a while. I probably should have, but I'm overriding the HTML behavior. Yeah, and then this is also the way you need to do it on React Native because you don't have any of that. Yeah. So on iOS, this will work exactly the same. Not that. This will work exactly the same. Okay. I think that's it for there. So as I said, you're not actually moving the items to the drop zones. But what if you actually wanted to move into the drop zones? So you wanted to figure out where something was dropped, and you wanted to figure out now I need to put this component over there. But basically, in almost all examples I've seen, I have 5 dungeon drop zones here. I also have 5 dragons. So I'm basically rendering only one of them that is important, but declared in the code is 5 dragons. If you look at the React-DnD chess example, where you're moving a knight around, there's 64 knights. There's one in each square. And you're just hiding one. A smarter way to do it would be like rendering out of an array and only just putting the child into that. That's a different way to do it. And we do that for some of our components. So if I move the dragon around, I'm still using the same drag layer and the same preview code I was using from the last example. Now I move the dragon here. He drags there. He's flying above, and he lands in the different areas. Right. So what does that code look like? Basically, I have 5 dungeon squares, which is all the drop code. Use drop, accepts a dragon. On drop, we call a function that was passed in. That's pretty much it. And it has children so that the dragon can live inside of it. And there's on drop. I set basically, for this one, I set him, he's on space 1. And this one, he's in space 2. And then if we're in space 1, show this dragon. Which basically, again, takes the offset. I did minus 100 on the Y just so it looked like it was flying above. And that's our same use drag. So we have the preview, we have the drag ref, the preview ref we're getting out, so we don't fight HTML drag previews. We're doing the same old thing since I have that offset information. Okay, oh, I have this so you can show. I don't need it. I didn't want to actually do anything where I changed code during the presentation, even a tiny little style. But yeah, if we go back here, that's basically it. On drop, we're setting he's in that space. On drop for the second one, we're setting he's in that space. And then so on, so forth and so on. You can loop this, you can do as many things as you want, which, of course, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, sometimes you will need, oh, this is going to look horrible. Okay. You will need to roll the 20-sided dice to figure out if you pass a check or do this or do that. So this is same concept. There are 25 squares, there are 25 dice. There's a different preview. that we're using. I thought this is the example I thought of when I wanted to do this talk, and I thought it was going to be a lot more complicated, and I thought I was actually going to need to use something called a custom backend, which actually I forgot to show something. Let's do that quick. A little anticipation. So when we set up the app, there's one more thing. In my app, you wrap the whole thing or whatever you need to use your drag and drop code in something that comes from React-DnD called a DnD provider. And then all the hooks inside can basically get access to some things. And you set the backend to the HTML5 backend on the web on Chromebooks and things where you're on the web, but you need touch events. There's a touch backend, and there's another NPM package that's the multi backend, which basically can figure out if you're using a click event to drag or touch, it'll swap the backends for you. But that's basically just gives you access to all the HTML stuff. And you can create a custom backend. So I thought for this example, I would need to create a custom backend where you have more functionality to tell React-DnD, I'm dropping in this zone, I'm hovering over this zone, or figure out information of where your drag sources are and your drop zones are, your drop targets are, and calculate different things and see if it's a hover, if it's a drop differently. But I didn't need to do that. That would have been cool. It probably would have been pretty complicated just going through a couple. You have to supply a bunch of different functions to a backend. But I'm kind of glad it was not necessary because this was a lot quicker. So what I'm doing is when you pick up the dice and drop it somewhere, it's going to roll 3 to 8 times, and it's going to drop into random spots and change the number between 1 and 20. So I'll pick it up. When you roll your dice, you always put the 20 on the top, right? Okay. Yeah. So it's rolling 3 times. I got a 1. That's perfect. Couldn't have been a 20 for the demo. All right, let's try over here. Rolling 3 times again. I got 2. Better. That's better. Okay. And do last one. And an 8. We'll take an 8, I guess. Okay. So let's see a little bit more about this. I just have some states up top. Dice state if we're rolling or not, the offset again. For the drag preview, which basically just was the nice red die with the 20 on top. Which dice space we are in. And the roll value. Some math random functions to get between 1 and 20 for the dice roll, 0 to 24 for the space, and 3 to 8 for how many times it rolls and bounces around, depending on how fiercely you rolled. So using a function just to create 25 values in an array, I have my same drag layer as we've seen before. I'm showing the dice state whether we're rolling or not, and I'm mapping over my array of 25 squares. Same thing as before when we're moving the dragon around. This is the drop, same thing except it's a d20. Not much. When it drops, we call the function that was passed in. If and we call set dice, which will do the rolling, and we'll go over that. If our dice space is the index for our map, then we show the d20, we pass in the roll value, and just move it a little. d20, basically the same thing as we've seen before with the dragon. We have the drag preview, we have the type item that we're passing around. We care for dragging because we want to hide it. We're fighting the good fight against HTML again. And same thing as before. We translate, move the item around when we're dragging it. So all set dice does is pretty simple. I mean, this is like high school programming. You're going to do something 3 to 8 times on an interval, set a couple states. I thought I would need to tell, and you could go create a custom backend, which might be overkill for this, but you can tell React-DnD, okay, when you get a drop, Like it's not actually a drop. I want you to hover on this space, and maybe on those you have some hover effects happening, like the dice explodes or makes a sound. And if you change direction, it makes a bounce, or you can figure out. I was going to do animations for this, but that seemed like adding maybe 2 to 3 hours of extra work for nothing, because that has nothing to do with drag and drop, but it would look a lot cooler. So with the back end, you can do all of that stuff. But what I'm doing is taking one drop and setting this, setting the space 5 different times, or 3 different times, or 8 different times. So basically the result, the fake, I dropped it here, looks like I'm going to drop it here, and then here, and then here, but it's not really. So it's kind of like a UI trick, kind of like a lot of the React-DnD stuff is, where there's the drag sources in each drop zone, and you're just kind of showing it, and then showing it, and then showing it. So that was it. That was a lot less work than I thought it would be for the last part of that, but it came out pretty cool, I think. All right, let's see. A couple more slides and we should be done. Next one, thank you. Okay, so you want to go to even higher levels. We were on level 20 there at the end. It probably wasn't 20, it was probably like 6 or 7. Add some animations for dropping and returning. So you, with the custom backend and things like that, you can add even that. Dragular is pretty much what you need to do to kind of get information about where things are, so you can do the animations. So you could drop, like have a smooth drop. So if you're a little bit off, it'll drop nice and smoothly, or the return will be smoother. Or the dragging around, you can make it have a little delay with the preview, use animations like that. Adding smoother hover effects. So that fire that showed up, maybe it'll be a highlight, and maybe when you're not hovering anything, that turns off, and things like that. Implement on React Native or React XP. I gave you a couple tips for that. Basically, you need to do all the custom stuff with the backend, because the backend does a lot of the measuring and about where you're hovering and things. And React Native and React XP have different hovering or measuring methods than we're used to in just React.js. So yeah, the custom backend to really control what happens. You get access to all the drag sources when they register. So when they're rendered, basically they just have an ID string. You can save off information. Like when something registers, you can measure it and put that information away. When a drop target, same thing, put that information away. So then when your hovering code comes in or your drop code comes in, you can change things like that. You can check different kinds of hovering. Most of the stuff right now hovers on the cursor, but what if you had a box and you wanted to not just hover the top left of the box to be here for you guys, you wanted to do the bottom right. You wanted the whole box. If any part of that box is hovering over the drop target, you wanted to accept it. Just change things like that. So for the chess example, since all those squares are really close, it still works on the cursor, but we have a couple different things where it'll work on which corner has the most area over which drop zone, and it'll go like that, which are actually some practical things we need to do. And you can have different valid and invalid drops using things like hover. Right now, if you're hovering on something, it kind of stays hovered. But if you have the thing where it kind of hovers off, you could keep it hovered and return anywhere you drop, it'll go there, or anywhere you drop, it'll go. If you're not exactly on there, it'll go back to where it started. So you can just have basically different UI choices like that, and UX, user experiences. That's really basically where the custom backend comes in. Okay. All right. Thank you for listening. Any questions? You've gained 1,000 experience and you found some loot, food and drink. So any questions? Yep. No.
Marriage. All right, 2 questions. One, would you consider it useful or valuable for something that might not necessarily be I'm dragging this from this place to that place and dropping it, more of like just the drag. Like what comes to mind is rotating something or resizing something, split panel.
Yeah.
Would this be something worthwhile using to do a UI like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there is an example. Let me see if I can find on the React-DnD website that you're just kind of, there's a box and there's two boxes, you're just moving them. You actually like, you get the result of where they are. Yes. Yeah.
Interpreted as drag and drop, but maybe visually doesn't necessarily seem like you're dragging something.
I have that example. Yes. Yeah. Because you can basically just get the information of what you picked up and where it's going.
Yes.
And you can just translate it there, leave it there, do whatever you want, move it. Yeah, drag a corner to expand a box. Yeah.
So the other question is the whole chessboard thing and the dragon thing where it's like, oh, I'm just hiding the images and they have that in their actual example code or tutorial. Is that prescriptive or is that just here's a maybe not optimized way?
That's just the way to do it. My way would be to keep track of it and just show one of the, I mean, it's all in the code, but nothing's rendered because it's React. But yeah, the cleaner way to do it would probably be render an array or something like that. Or yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I know Joe asked about testing in the last talk. How have you dealt with testing in React-DnD?
Haven't done too much.
No,
because it's very hard. You would need to mock a lot of things. You would basically need to test your handling, how your whatever is handling the events that coming back.
Oh,
yeah. So you, yeah.
Oh no.
Well, if they drag it to this, and that event fire,
Right.
they can do the right thing, but if you actually want to move something, you gotta have it.
Yeah, there are, React testing library has those events, like the drag events and on hover and stuff like that, for the HTML elements, but they don't seem to translate very well to some of the stuff we're using. Yeah, one of our guys was trying to integrate something into the unified drag and drop we're using into one of the products as a proof of concept and testing. It was just going to take a lot of time and probably some clever mocks to test then the client code that responds to all that.
It feels like it's reassuring because I have a bunch of stuff that I did with React-DnD and I tried the testing and it was not happening. So at least, so I'm not alone. So that's good.
Yeah, I tried to do a little bit and I was just like, and they're like, don't worry about it for now. Someone will put it on some schedule somewhere.
And he said they won't. I'm one of those that just won't provide you like an X coordinate, but all the other companies always have. And the bug, I check it every few years. Last time I checked it, it's 12 years old. And it's just somebody keeps saying like this is now 9 years old.
Who has a little party, has a glass of champagne and adds a note. Yeah. That's good. Anything else? Good. All right. Thank you.